Veiled chameleons, Panther chameleons, Jackson's chameleons, Carpet chameleons. What is the best pet chameleon? Stay tuned, we're gonna cover that. Hey guys, welcome to the Leap Lab. Today we are joined by the one and only Frank Payne from Living Art and Kelsey Melnick, my favorite animal husbandry specialist. Today we're going to talk about a much-loved chameleon amongst this group, which is the Carpet Chameleon. If you don't already know, these two are probably the foremost carpet chameleon keepers in the entire country. I would argue that these two have produced more carpet chameleons in the last 5 years than anyone else potentially in the world. It's entirely possible that that's a true statement. So without further ado, I want to talk to both of you about what is your history with the carpet chameleon itself.
Mine isn't as intense, so I'll go first. I have been working with them for about 5 years, breeding them. Each year we go up in how many eggs we get, but this past year was around 215. So
it's a lot of eggs.
Yeah, we have a lot of chameleons.
Yes, yes, that is true. What about you, Frank? How long?
I've been keeping chameleons in general for close to 30 years at this point. Carpet chameleons closer to like 8 years, something like that. And pretty similar to you guys is I average about 200 eggs, 200 babies a year at this point. I try and keep that fairly consistent. I could definitely do more, but I simply, like, they breed so well, I just don't have the space. You know how that goes.
Yep, absolutely. And that's one of the cool things that that's true of carpet chameleons is they really do breed well when you have a good group of them. And that makes obviously space a consideration, but it also allows you to be particular about the animals that you keep, make sure that you are always keeping new bloodlines, that you're not just inbreeding your collection over time. So it's a real benefit. So I'm going to go through my list of questions here, guys, because we have some good ones. What do you like the most about carpet chameleons? Let's start with Frank.
Probably the thing I like the most is their size. They are small compared to most other commonly kept species. So they're very manageable, very easy to keep in reasonable sized enclosures. So something like this behind us is basically a mansion for them, where no other species of chameleon that you could commonly get could be kept in that. So the fact that they are small and also just very hardy and beautiful.
What about keeping them in a larger terrarium?
I mean, larger is better if you can. Like, they do very well in these this size enclosure. That's quite big for them. But if you can do bigger, you're going to see even more behaviors. You're going to see more activity. And so if you're only keeping like one pet chameleon, yeah, go bigger.
Go as big as you can.
Yeah, go as big as you can, because then you're just going to have a bigger piece of nature, and that animal is going to display more naturalistic behavior.
Yep, makes sense. What about you, Kelsey? What do you like most about carpet chameleons?
Coloration, of course, and seeing the different colors between males and females. And then also, like he said, the size of them is just incredible. It's uncomparable, honestly.
Yeah, having a lot of people are chasing after the next huge lizard, whether it be a monitor lizard or a snake, or especially chameleons. Everyone loves giant panthers and of course the parsons, but there's a lot to be said about having a little pet chameleon. You get all the same benefits in terms of coloration, the tongue that darts out to get the insects, the eye turrets, the interesting hands, but you can have many within a smaller space.
And quite frankly, it's just so, the reason people in the industry tend to make fun of me a little bit for only focusing on smaller species. And I do it for selfish reasons because of the space considerations, but also for ethical reasons as well, because I'm much more comfortable keeping a small animal in a smaller enclosure than a medium or large animal in a similar size enclosure. Like, it's just better for the animal, so it makes me feel better about being a keeper.
So good lead in, do carpet chameleons make good pet chameleons? If there could be a good pet chameleon, would you consider a carpet chameleon one of those?
I would. I think that a male carpet chameleon is the best pet chameleon that you can get.
Yep.
There's no reproductive issues. They tend to be more calm than the females. They live longer. They're still beautiful when they fire up. And there's this little jewel that you can have in a beautifully planted terrarium. So yeah, in my opinion, they are the best pet chameleon.
Is there a male chameleon behind you that you could grab?
Maybe.
Let's see if we can find one front and center. If not, I've got a girl right here.
Here's one. Is that a nice one there? Are we gonna grab him up there?
Yeah, he's like right here.
See? Oh yeah, this is a beauty. Come here, buddy. Oh yeah, great pick, Kelsey. You know where the good ones are kept. So this is a beautiful adult male carpet chameleon, and he's gonna reduce his colors a little bit since we pulled him out. He just get a little upset to be pulled out, but also staying relatively calm. So this is not an animal that we would typically handle all the time. They're not a bearded dragon or a blue-tongued skink, but you can also see how calm it is. This is not an animal that's freaking out, trying to bite. And this is about as ugly as this animal will get, and it's still quite pretty with the green colors. Yeah, you put this animal in front of a female or put him in the enclosure and leave him alone, and you're gonna see some beautiful colors coming out of this guy.
So with a pet chameleon, you brought up, you don't want to handle it quite the same way as you would a bearded dragon. So I think it's pretty important to say specifically, you're not going to be petting a chameleon.
No.
Yeah, exactly. You're not going to be playing with a chameleon.
They're visual.
Yeah, you can take it out, you can hold the animal, but that's about it. And don't think that you could watch an episode of TV with this guy on your shoulder. It's not the appropriate animal for that kind of thing, but they are still beautiful and they're still easy to hold. They're sweet little animals, and just for clarification, this is a female.
Yeah, just to add on to what Frank said too, the males are definitely way easier. You don't have to worry about any type of breeding or getting egg bound. If you just want a simple setup with one animal, you don't want to breed, definitely get a male.
I don't think it gets any simpler for chameleon keeping than a single male carpet chameleon.
Okay, yeah, so that leads us into the next question, which is, if you're a beginner, or even if you've kept some crested geckos, bearded dragons, multiple other animals that are just as interesting and fun as those species, and you want to try a chameleon, carpet chameleon, we've already established it's a good pet lizard to try out. It's a good first chameleon, I would say.
It is.
What about for breeding? Is it a good chameleon to try your hands at breeding?
Yeah, I mean I could think of one species or maybe two that are easier to breed.
Okay.
But again, they're big. The veiled chameleon is the easiest species of chameleon to breed. They are. They're the hardiest, if one of the top 3 hardiest, but they're this big.
Yeah.
And they also, when they lay eggs, it's 30 to 50 eggs at a time.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do with 30 to 50 babies when they hatch?
There's a lot of veiled chameleons out there. It's hard to find that many people who actually want a baby veiled chameleon.
Exactly right. They're selling babies for $30. That's just trying to get rid of them.
But that's not true with carpet chameleons.
No.
There are very few carpet chameleon breeders out there.
No, and like you said, the 3 of us here produce probably 90% of the carpet chameleons in the United States.
Yeah, I would say that carpet chameleons are a really good species to try and breed. I would say that collectively we could use the help of some more people getting involved in this species.
Absolutely, and going back to what I said about veileds having such large clutches of eggs, carpets are like, what, 10, 12 on average, sometimes up to 18, sometimes less.
Our biggest this year was 18.
That's the biggest I've ever had as well.
Our smallest was 3, so it really does vary.
I've had 4, I think, is my smallest one, but that's great. So we're talking an average of 10 eggs. That's perfect to start breeding.
It is.
Because you're not overwhelmed with eggs. Like, you're 30 to 50, or even like Panther chameleons, 20 babies at a time. That's a lot.
It's a lot of mouths to feed.
It is.
And just like any chameleon, it's better to keep them individually, even as babies.
A lot of baby enclosures.
Yep. All right, so let's get into some of the more specific aspects. Why don't we talk about the basic top level of how do you set up a terrarium for carpet chameleons?
Do you want me to show you?
Well, we're going to show at the end,
okay.
But why don't you use some of the terrariums behind us to just show the basics, and maybe Connor on the camera as we do this, we can show the inside.
So underneath, I'll open this up, we have a layer of leca, and then we have a dividing screen. On top of that, we have a substrate that is really great at holding some moisture in there that keeps all of our plants.
And that substrate,
happy.
In this case, is our Leap Living Earth substrate. It's an ABG mix. It is custom formulated by us, and we use it in every terrarium in the entire Leap lab.
We also add in a whole bunch of branches and put them every single way that we can, while still being sturdy, so that the animal has an abundance of places to walk around and move around.
And what about places to hide versus exposure out in the open? What's a good ratio of branches out versus hiding areas?
More so, they're out.
Okay.
Yeah, if you kind of can scan over here and see some of these like this one and this one and these are like,
these are a little bit more grown
yeah,
in.
you know, those were recently set up. Those plants need to grow in a little bit. These have been more established, and something like this is pretty perfect. If we're talking ratios, I would say like 2/3 of the enclosure space should be a bushy plant like we see here, so the animal can be completely hidden, both from observers and also from lighting. If it wants to get away from UV light or just bright light in general, it can feel secure and hide, but it also has these branches that are exposed to the UV light and to the heat above. So the whole idea of reptile keeping is giving the animal choices. All right? If you are careful and thoughtful, you can take a small terrarium like this and give them all the options that they need: high light, high heat, no light, you know, minimal heat, and all that.
So tech guys, don't worry, we're going to be getting into the husbandry specifics and the parameters of Carpet Chameleon next. Why don't we cover first parameter number 1, which is daylight and photo period. So what are we using with our Carpet Chameleons for daylight?
So we have an LED strip that is on, right now we're in winter, so it's on for about like 8 to 9 hours a day.
Okay. All right, so that covers, and that's an interesting thing that you point out, because parameter number 2, as we know, is UV, but the UV is not on for the same amount of time as the daylight. Is that true?
It's not. We have it offset. I think right now 4 hours we have it offset from when the daylight comes on.
Okay, so the reason for this is that during the winter you can get less UV exposure because of the angle of the Earth relative to the sun. Now, the further you are from the equator, the more the more that is. But regardless, we actually use the duration that the UV light is turned on in order to adjust the amount of UV that our animals get, in addition to whether or not we use a UV 5.0 or a 10.0, and of course the proximity. Now, with a baker's rack system like this, you don't actually get to directly vary the proximity of the UV lamp to the cage, but you can move the basking spots, the sticks, further or closer, and so we'll use a UV meter, come in and measure, and we can set up our terrariums that way. And then we also have the photo period of UV to adjust to get it really dialed in. Parameter number 3, heat. Frank, why don't you talk about this one, because this is kind of the last couple years we've changed our way of thinking about heat with carpets.
Yes, we have. My old care articles and podcasts and even the videos that I've done, we talked about using miniature puck lights, halogen heat bulbs that I would use for the Carpet Chameleons. But you know, looking what you have here, and if you were to look at my setup at home, you wouldn't see those anymore. You know, the fact of the matter is that Carpet Chameleons are not strictly like high heat tropical animals. They're semi-montane, relatively cool. Not cold, 70s. Mid to high 70s is fantastic. Low 80s is okay. They don't need that. And they certainly don't need a 90 to 100 degree basking spot, which is what I used to use. You know, I'm not, you know, afraid to say that, you know, things that I've done in the past weren't great and needed to be improved. And I'm all about progressive care. And that's one thing that we've changed, and it's simply, you don't need to use the electricity. And the animals are not necessarily, they tend to not always make the best choices. We want to give them choices, but sometimes if you give them a hot basking spot, they'll go under there to try and warm themselves up and could possibly burn themselves or just overheat. So just kind of getting rid of that, and you get a more natural temperature gradient in there.
Yep, and I find within our habitats that the chameleons will often be basking underneath both the LED or the T5. The LED does emit heat, regardless of it being a low heat or high efficiency light source. And for Carpet Chameleons, with the ambient room temperature being within a range that's acceptable for the carpet, which is quite truthfully normal ambient room temperature.
That's a major plus, right? You know, that's one of the biggest selling points of the Rhacodactylus geckos or the crested geckos.
And Carpet Chameleons.
Is the fact that you can throw Carpet Chameleons in there now too, because you don't have to heat them. You don't, you know, normal room temperatures that human beings are comfortable at, the carpets are also comfortable at. So that's a major selling point, in my opinion, for this species in general.
So parameter number 4, rainfall. And if you've been watching the LEAP videos or have listened to us talk about it, we separate rainfall from humidity, because in reality the two are different. An organism's need for humidity is independent from its need for water in the form of rain, or the water that the plants need in order to grow. So parameter number 4, rainfall. We use it mostly for drinking water for the carpet chameleons and to water the plants. How often, Frank, are you watering your carpets?
So I do seasonal variation, just like Kelsey mentioned with the lighting. You know, we give them more lighting in the summer and less in the winter. I also give them a wet and a dry season. In the summer, when it's warmer, I mist them more frequently. In the winter, less frequently. So, but I'd say on average, approximately 3 times a day. Like mornings, right after the lights come on, evenings, right before the lights go out, sometimes in the middle of the night. And if I feel like the enclosure is particularly dry, I'll throw an extra misting in during the day.
Kelsey, what about you?
I think right now we're doing 3 times a day, around a minute each. And then normally I'm in there every single day too.
Hand misting.
Hand misting.
And then we're going to go into parameter 5. We're going to start with Kelsey. Parameter number 5, humidity. What humidity levels are we keeping? And I'm going to note on this one, just like temperature, and we'll come back to that one too. For parameter number 2, temp, and parameter number 5, humidity, you've got a daytime number, but you've also got a nighttime number.
Yeah.
So let's go humidity. What are our days and what are our nights?
So the humidity, we control the whole room. We do days around 65 and nights around 85.
Yep. Yep. And then do we change that during the winter?
Right now, no.
Nope. And nor do we recommend that you do, because the reality is, from everything we've researched so far, from what we've been practicing internally, in the environment that chameleons come from in Madagascar in general, while you have a dry season and a rainy season, the difference is not humidity, the difference is rainfall. What about you, Frank?
Pretty similar. I'm not as good about keeping numerical records as you guys are. I tend to feel my way through things, but when I have checked it during the day, between 40 and 60%, 50 to 60 would be ideal. And then at night, 80 to 100%.
And how are you providing humidity?
Through keeping in enclosures like these leap habitats where it is primarily solid-sided with just screen openings on the top and some ventilation at the bottom for the chimney effect, but primarily keeping the humidity in and a misting system. So by the way that I mist, it provides the fact that I mist right before the lights go out, so there is water in there as the lights go out. And then because the temperature drops at night, that increases the relative humidity of the room. That's why there are natural humidity cycles in the wild, because of the temperature changes that go on from day to
with the same
night.
amount of water in the air, if the temperature drops, that water actually represents a higher humidity level.
So I mean, I personally don't use fogging systems right now just because I have such a large collection.
It's very hard to use individual fogging systems when you have 50 different habitats set up.
Exactly right. So for me, it's just by misting and by regulating when I mist. And it's also very important not to overwater though too. It is important to let it dry out in between mistings, because constant wetness, like actual water droplets, can lead to bacteria and mold growth, so you do have to be careful about that.
So Kelsey had mentioned we do not use individual foggers like the ones here from Leap. We actually use a whole room fogger. But for the average pet chameleon keeper, where maybe you only have 1 chameleon or maybe you have 6 or 8 chameleons, a fogger is a really effective means of creating the ideal humidity, combined with a habitat that has solid sides and provides sufficient chimney effect ventilation from the bottom through to the top. I would argue that the days of all screen chameleon enclosures, unless you're keeping that chameleon outside in the summer or in Southern California, it's not really the most appropriate choice.
I rant about this all the time to anyone that will listen. I hate all screen enclosures for chameleons. It's been one of those dogmatic things in the hobby and industry that people have long accepted, unfortunately. But keeping chameleons indoors, all screen enclosures are simply not good for the animal. Outdoors in the appropriate habitat, the appropriate climate, awesome. But indoors, that needs to go. That's a dead method of keeping them, as far as I'm concerned.
I would argue it's 2 decades behind what we know.
Absolutely.
What we know is being better. All right, so let's skip to the fun part here. Kelsey has graciously offered to plant, essentially build a carpet chameleon habitat using a Leap 15 by 17 by 24.
Yes.
We're going to show you some of the Leap gear that we're going to use on this particular habitat, and then when we're done, we're going to put a baby carpet chameleon in, and we'll install it on the top of our rack. So without further ado, let's shift over to the setup here. Why don't you walk us through this, Kelsey?
Yeah, so I already, as I showed you in the other enclosure, I already have the blackout layer, a screen divider, and then the substrate.
And what you're showing there is the liner itself,
Yeah,
correct? Which is
inside.
installed in
Yep.
the habitat.
Yep, so we're gonna start off with this big plant. I want a lot of vertical space since this is a tall enclosure. Just gonna get a garbage can.
So notice that she's taken the plant out of out of the pot, but you're still including a lot of the soil that came with the plant, right, Kelsey?
I am. Sometimes it depends on how many roots there are.
Yeah.
But for this plant, it seemed like it wasn't in that pot for too long, so I was just gonna leave it in there.
So if it's super root bound, what would you do?
I would try to break it up a little bit because I want it to acclimate nicely into the new substrate. I'm sorry,
Take your time.
So you see what Kelsey did, what I really like, is always like to take the plant and push it more towards the back of the enclosure.
Yep.
And maybe even sometimes slightly offset, because then that allows for a more open area, like we talked about before, giving the animal choices, and more dense in the back so the animal can retreat if it wants. So that's an awesome plant placement.
I like it a little bit more in the center just because then the mister hits it a little bit nicer.
Sure, makes sense.
A little bit more substrate.
So for those that don't already know, the Leap Living Earth substrate is a mix of coconut coir, fir, bark, leaves, and milled sphagnum, as well as carbon. And it's a really nice hand-selected mix of various different parameters that make a very good substrate to break down. It's not at the end of its cycle, you know. It's got plenty of time, months, years to break down and become more and more of a nutritious soil substrate. It's light, it's airy, it drains water extremely well, and our plants do great in it. You'll see that Kelsey will also be supplementing with sticks.
We have a bunch of awesome sticks, and then, of course, some leaf litter.
Yep.
I'm gonna add that in first.
What's the purpose of the leaf litter?
It is good for bioactive enclosures so that the bioactive critters have something to break down. Also, it's good,
Looks good.
I think it looks good.
It also helps
It's
to
good for visual.
hold the humidity in the soil as well too, so it prevents the soil from drying out too quickly. And that's what you would see in nature, is that layer of like humus there on the surface of the soil, in microhabitats for isopods and springtails and things like that.
And if you're keeping a gecko
Yes,
or
that's-
other animal that lays eggs inside of your habitat, then it's an excellent choice because it allows them to lay their eggs naturally. And it's actually pretty important. Without the leaf litter, some of those animals just won't lay, or won't be happy about laying. Now, chameleons, on the other hand, typically do not want to lay eggs inside their terrarium. Some will, but it's healthier and better if you remove your chameleon and transport it to a lay bucket, which is typically made of a sandy mixture.
Yeah, more I do like
substrate.
we use like a 50-50 of peat and sand, without anything else in it that's not meant to be bioactive.
So what are you doing there with the horizontal branches?
so that they can get close to the light, also so they have horizontal room to move as well as vertical.
And that's really important for chameleon care.
It is, yeah. Once you've been keeping chameleons long enough, you realize that if they have choices, they'll choose to travel horizontally in more cases. But it's also very important to, again, give them choices. Give them diagonal, give them vertical, give them all the options that you physically can.
So while Kelsey grabs the last few branches, I'm going to show you, if this were your carpet chameleon habitat, and it's your first pet carpet chameleon, or maybe you've had a ton, what would be the equipment that we would recommend for the top of this habitat? And what it would be one of our 12-inch LED UVB, German-made UVB lamps. We would recommend a 5.0, fits perfectly right on the top of the terrarium. And then we would add a second one, which would be the daylight bulb, also LED, and you'd put that on the back. Now, if you were gonna run them on a timer with one another, you would end up using one of our interconnect cables that you would actually connect the two lights to one another so that when you turn the timer on, they both go on at the same time. If not, if you want to do a setup more like what we do in the Leap Lab, where your UV is offset from your daylight, you would just run two independent cords and you would put them on two different timers. In addition to that, we would recommend one of our Leap Habitat's fogging systems, which would be installed next to the terrarium, below the terrarium, above the terrarium, and you would very carefully plumb the tubing up into the terrarium itself. So I'll show you one of those guys. And the beautiful part about the Leap fogging system is that it actually has built-in interval timing, so you don't need to add a secondary timer if you don't want to. You can fog sporadically throughout the day. If you would like to fog only at night, then you would use a timer. You'd set it to always on and you'd use a timer to turn the thing on only at night. So you can see it comes with two fogging tubes and a Y splitter, which allows you to use it on two different terrariums if you'd like, or you can plumb it up into just one. So in this case, we'd put the fogger next to the terrarium, and then we would run the tube, and you'd want to have it in a situation more or less like that. And then you figure out a way to secure it. And we'll be offering accessories for securing things like this in the future, so don't worry. As well as even some really cool innovative solutions for baker's rack, fogging solutions for baker's racks. One thing I didn't mention, if you're using the Leap lighting inside of a baker's rack, we supply these clips. And these clips can also be screwed up underneath the shelf. And the way the clips work is once they're mounted to the baker's rack or screwed into a shelf, they just snap on. All right, and then the light can be held above the terrarium. And we are actually using these clips on all the Leap lighting within the reptile room here. To remove them, you just pull up on it, comes right off. The next thing you would want, as Frank and Kelsey both mentioned, is a misting system. So to launch, we are offering Leap's starter misting system, which is good for up to 2 misting nozzles. So you could use both of them on one terrarium, or you could split them and use one on each terrarium. Now, what we didn't mention was on the top of each Leap habitat is a knockout that using a screwdriver, a hammer, or anything, you just punch it out and it leaves a hole that is exactly the right size for the misting nozzles that come with the Leap starter misting system. More than enough tubing is supplied and an AC adapter. Fill it with water. All these can be filled, but the fogger and the mister can be filled from the top, or you can remove the top and bring the basin to a faucet. So you would put that next to it, you'd install the misting nozzle into the knockout, and you would run your tube up. Between the lighting, the misting nozzle, the fogger, the substrate, and the drainage layer, which will include a screen size for each habitat, that is actually all the equipment that is needed to give a pet carpet chameleon exactly the habitat that it needs. And the only thing you would have to do at that point is supply the chameleon and the plants and the sticks. So without further ado, Kelsey, why don't you supply the chameleon to this one?
Let's do it.
Kelsey's gonna pick out a carpet chameleon from our nursery cages back here.
I'm just trying to find a bigger one to upgrade.
So the nice thing about these nursing cages is that you can fit a ton of chameleons within one small area. So there you go. Why don't you show Connor?
Yep.
We'll do more and more
Alright,
videos.
so here
and then
we
we're gonna preview
have
some, yeah.
about a 4-month-old female. I am just holding lightly on the tail so that she doesn't try to jump.
So Kelsey, I noticed that this one was born October, so that's in the winter months.
Yes.
But when we have a chameleon at about 4 months old that's born in June, often it'll be a lot bigger.
Yeah.
So the reason for this is because they just tend to grow slower during the cooler temperatures. It's never been a problem for us. They all reach adult size. It's not a race to get there first. And so long as they have a healthy diet and provided adequate UVs, they all become sexually mature when they become sexually mature. It can happen as soon as, what, 4.5 months in some cases?
I mean, I've seen male carpet chameleons breed at 3.5, 4 months old. But you know, there's a very positive point of view that growing them slower is actually healthier for the animal, not rushing them, not power feeding them and getting them to maturity as fast as possible. So that's a natural, normal thing for them to grow at
and temperature is a good way of regulating that.
Yep.
All right, we're putting him in his forever home.
She's unsure.
Oh, it's a girl, we decided.
There we go.
There she goes. All right, so I'd like to say again that I truly believe that these two represent the most experienced at the current time in terms of carpet chameleon care, carpet chameleon breeding. These two have plenty of eggs under their belt, plenty of babies under their belt. We've been doing it a long time. There's another person that we'd also like to recognize for being a real pioneer in the world of carpet chameleons. That's Kevin Stanford, who also lives in Pennsylvania like us.
Yep. Yeah, Kevin's a good friend of ours, and he's the one that got us both started in carpet chameleons, and we wouldn't be here without Kevin. He bred them, I think, for 10 generations, which is unheard of for almost any reptile species. So without his pioneering work with the species, we would not have had the success that we have had.
Yep. I mean, we're not at 10 generations. I think we're on generation 4 or
I think it's like 6 or 7 for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So where else, Frank, could we find information on carpet chameleons if that's what we're looking for?
Yeah, so I've put out a decent amount of care information for carpet chameleons. I have articles posted on my website. I have care videos posted on my YouTube channel. I've had an article on carpets published in Reptiles magazine. And then we have done, and Kevin as well, a great podcast with Bill Strand, the Chameleon Breeder podcast. He puts out some of the best chameleon care information out there, so definitely check out.
Most specialized.
So now
for
it's
sure.
called, excuse me, it's now called the Chameleon Academy.
That's right.
So check that out online.
And check them out on Instagram. Check us out on Instagram, Leap Habitats, as well as leap.kelsey, leap.tim. Frank can be found at Living Art by Frank Payne on Instagram as well as on Facebook.
Yep.
We're on Facebook too, and our YouTube channel. Don't forget to click subscribe, like the video, and stay tuned for more content. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you guys very much.
Absolutely.
We'll see y'all later.